There is a strange kind of silence buried in the spine of the Bible, a silence not of absence, but of removal. It echoes in the gaps, in the verses that never made it to the printed page you hold, a silence forged not by God, but by men. In the year 1684, 14 books were quietly extracted from the most printed book in human history, books once nestled between the sacred texts of prophets and kings, books once read, debated, and revered. Now they sit on the fringes of memory, hidden beneath centuries of theological politics and spiritual gatekeeping. But why? Why would entire scrolls, bearing visions, wisdom, and prophetic fire, be torn from the tapestry of Scripture? Were they mere footnotes of history, or did they hold truths too wild, too dangerous, or too liberating for the dogmas of men? To understand this vanishing, we must rewind the world, back to a time before the printing press, before Protestantism, before the Bible became a fixed thing, back to when holy texts were fluid and revelation was still in motion. Imagine a great library, not of stone, but of spirit, scrolls whispered between desert mystics, translated by candlelight in ancient monasteries, guarded in secret by wandering sects. These were the words that didn't just speak about God, but dared to speak as God. Stories of angels who fell not from grace, but from divine command. Visions of apocalypse that rivaled revelation. Parables not of salvation alone, but of sacred science, karmic law, and the soul's hidden geometry. These are the Apocrypha. The word Apocrypha comes from the Greek apokryphos, meaning hidden or obscure. Not because they were forgotten, but because they were veiled, reserved, esoteric. Not everyone was meant to see them. The earliest Bibles, the Septuagint in Greek and the Latin Vulgate, contained these books without question. They sat comfortably between the Torah and the New Testament, bridging the Old Covenant and the New with rich, mystical insight. For over 1,000 years, they were considered scripture. Then came the Reformation. Suddenly, the question wasn't what God said. It was who got to decide what counted as His word. Part 2. The Reformation and the Scissors of Doctrine. The 16th century cracked the sky open. Martin Luther, with a hammer and 95 theses, shattered the authority of Rome and sparked a wildfire across Europe. But revolutions are not just political, they are theological. And every revolution needs to decide what to keep and what to burn. Luther and the other reformers returned to the Hebrew canon to redefine what counted as true scripture. In doing so, they bypassed over a millennium of Christian tradition. They looked not to the broad, inclusive canon of the Septuagint or the Vulgate, but to the narrower Hebrew texts, which never included the Apocrypha. To them, the apocryphal books were suspect, too mystical, too allegorical, too Catholic. Some were tolerated at first. Luther included them in his German Bible, but placed them in a separate section. He called them useful and good to read, but not equal to the Holy Scriptures. Others weren't so kind. Over time, many of the books were demoted, marginalized, then finally erased. In 1684, the Church of England officially removed the Apocrypha from its version of the Bible. This cemented a trend that had already taken root. Bibles across the Protestant world began printing without them. What was once sacred was now apocryphal, hidden again, but this time by human hands. What were these 14 books? They included ancient wisdom texts like Ecclesiasticus and the Wisdom of Solomon, which echo the Proverbs but with deeper mystical undertones. There were tales of courage and resistance, like 1 and 2 Maccabees, recounting Jewish revolt and divine justice. There were books like Tobit, a deeply symbolic tale of angelic guidance and alchemical healing. Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah, speaks with apocalyptic weight about the exile and the soul's journey. In 2nd Esdras, perhaps the most striking of all, dares to question God directly. These weren't trivial footnotes. These were scriptures that asked dangerous questions. What is the nature of the soul? Why does God allow suffering? Is the future fixed or fluid? Can divine wisdom exist outside of priesthoods and institutions? Questions that feel more relevant now than ever. These books did not vanish because they lacked truth. They vanished because they carried too much of it. They were texts that encouraged spiritual sovereignty. They invited the reader to think, not just obey, to explore the divine mystery directly, not just through sanctioned channels, and that for some was a threat, not to faith, but to control. Part 3, the books themselves, lost voices of fire and light. To read the Apocrypha is to walk through a door the modern Bible left sealed shut. These are not stories for the timid. They speak in riddles, they question divine justice, and they paint the cosmos not as a cold machine, but as a living drama of soul, choice, and celestial consequence. Let's open a few of these hidden scrolls together. 1. The Book of Tobit. Here, a blind man sends his son on a journey to reclaim family fortune. But what unfolds is no simple tale. It's a spiritual allegory. Tobias is guided by a mysterious stranger named Raphael, who later reveals himself as an archangel. A demon must be defeated. A marriage must be sanctified. And a fish, yes, a fish, becomes a vessel of healing. This book is not just folklore. It encodes layers of esoteric symbolism, the journey of the soul, divine intervention through the unseen, and the spiritual marriage between will and wisdom. It speaks of a world where angels still walk in human clothes. 2. The Wisdom of Solomon. A masterpiece of mystical thought, this text weaves philosophy with prophecy. It contemplates the immortal soul, divine justice, and the sacred nature of wisdom. As a feminine, cosmic intelligence that orders the universe, she is not passive, she is active. She is more beautiful than the sun and surpasses every constellation of the stars, it says. This isn't mere poetry, it is hermetic in tone, echoing ancient Egyptian and Greek traditions that saw wisdom as a living presence, a guiding force that leads initiates through the labyrinth of life toward illumination. 3. 1 and 2 Maccabees. Far from abstract metaphysics, these are tales of rebellion and sacred fire. They tell the story of the Jewish revolt against the Seleucid Empire, when the temple was defiled and the light of tradition nearly extinguished. In these texts, we see themes of resistance, purification, and divine justice enacted through human courage. It was from this narrative that the celebration of Hanukkah was born, not found in the standard Old Testament, but here in the Apocrypha. Quarto Ecclesiasticus, Sirach. This book is a treasury of moral wisdom, like Proverbs, but deeper. It warns of pride and the misuse of power. It praises the humility of the worker, the healer, and the sage. But it also does something radical. It honors the lineage of wisdom. It names those who carried the flame forward: prophets, poets, builders, midwives of spirit. In an age that wants quick truth, Sirach invites us to remember, wisdom is not a lightning strike. It is a fire passed hand to hand, generation to generation. 5. 2 Esdras. This is the crown jewel of the Apocrypha for many seekers. Apocalyptic, visionary, and raw. It reads like a lost book of Revelation. The prophet Ezra questions God directly. Why was the world made if so many perish? Why do the wicked prosper? What is the fate of the soul? God responds in riddles and metaphors, but the message is clear. The world is a divine trial, and few will understand its meaning unless they awaken. Esdras doesn't just present prophecy, it invites transformation. It asks not for belief, but for vision. These books weren't removed because they lacked inspiration. They were removed because they dared to inspire outside the lines. Part 4. The Power of the Hidden. Why these books still matter. Why do the lost books still pulse with so much power? Because the Apocrypha doesn't just inform, it initiates. Unlike the more canonical texts, which often deliver linear narratives or strict commandments, these writings draw the reader into a deeper dialogue. They whisper, they provoke, and they awaken parts of the soul modern religion often leaves untouched. They speak to the seeker, not just the believer. In 2 Esdras, when Ezra begs the divine to explain why humanity suffers, he's told, "You come far short of loving my creation more than I." That single line contains a galaxy of wisdom. It pierces the illusion that human understanding can grasp the full spectrum of divine purpose. It humbles the mind while still inviting the heart forward. These books teach through paradox. They balance structure with mystery. They give shape to spiritual laws while also acknowledging the chaos of the human path. They don't flatten the journey, they ignite it. But there's another reason these texts still matter, and it's perhaps even more vital now than in the 1600s. They represent a spiritual authority that does not bow to institutional power. The moment truth becomes centralized, filtered through kings, popes, and councils, it risks being tamed. These lost books, in all their unruly, mystical fire, refuse to be tamed. They challenge not only our picture of God, but our assumptions about who gets to speak for the divine. And that's dangerous, not to those who seek truth, but to those who control it. By removing the Apocrypha, a doorway was closed, but not locked, because hidden knowledge always finds a way to rise again, especially when the time is right. And if you are listening now, if these words stir something in you, it means the time is right. These books weren't meant to be locked in academic vaults. They are invitations, written in an older tongue, calling us back to the living mystery, not to merely read the word, but to become it. Part 5, the Apocrypha in the Inner Temple. Every sacred book is a mirror, and these lost texts reflect something the modern world has tried to forget, that the temple of God is not made of stone, but of consciousness. The apocryphal books don't just add forgotten history, they reveal an inner cosmology, a hidden anatomy of the soul. In the Wisdom of Solomon, the soul is described as eternal, pre-existent, a spark of divine origin clothed in mortality. It's a view that aligns with ancient Egyptian theology, early Gnostic thought, and the Hermetic principle that man is a microcosm of the universe. The divine is not distant, it is encoded in your very breath. Tobit shows us angelic healing and alchemical symbols: fish, gall, blindness, and sight, all metaphors for spiritual awakening and purification. Baruch mourns the exile of a people, but more deeply it mourns the exile of the soul from truth, calling it to return to the Creator through wisdom and remembrance. And Ecclesiasticus does something radical. It speaks of honoring your parents, not just earthly, but spiritual parents, the ancestors, the lineages of truth keepers, mystics, and prophets who carried light through the ages. It says, don't just pray. Remember, this is not religion. This is initiation. The Apocrypha teaches not obedience, but participation. You are not meant to stand outside the sacred. You are meant to step inside, to sit with the angel, to ask hard questions of the divine, to wander through exile and emerge refined. In many ways, the removal of these books reflects a deeper crisis, a loss of spiritual literacy. Without them, the Bible becomes a fortress. With them, it becomes a labyrinth, with secret doors leading to the inner temple. And that temple is inside you. You are not just the reader of sacred text. You are its final chapter. The canon isn't closed. It never was. It lives every time someone chooses wonder over fear, wisdom over dogma, mystery over control. That's what the Apocrypha offers. Not a supplement, but a return to a more ancient memory, a return to the hidden flame. Part 6, the return of the forbidden flame. Centuries have passed since the Apocrypha was cut from the sacred page, but truth has a rhythm of its own. What is buried is not always lost. It waits. And now, in this age of spiritual hunger and crumbling systems, the forbidden books call out again, not with thunder, but with stillness, not from pulpits, but from within. Across the world, readers, seekers, and sages are rediscovering these texts, not just as historical curiosities, but as spiritual companions. They are finding in 2 Esdras a mirror for modern anxiety, in Wisdom of Solomon a compass for lost generations, in Tobit a parable for divine protection in uncertain times. It's no coincidence. The soul of humanity is stirring. The age of blind belief is giving way to conscious knowing. And the Apocrypha, those 14 orphan books, are part of the awakening. They remind us that the sacred is not frozen in doctrine, it breathes. That revelation didn't stop in the 1st century. It continues in dreams, in silence, in the sudden knowing that comes from within. They teach us that angels don't always announce themselves, that wisdom sometimes wears the cloak of exile. That truth may be hidden, but never destroyed. And so the question is no longer, why were these books removed? The real question is, why are they returning now? Maybe because you are ready. Maybe because the old keys no longer open the doors you long to walk through. Maybe because the voice you've been trying to hear in empty spaces has been whispering to you through these ancient words all along. So take them up, not just as pages from the past, but as initiations. Read them not to understand the world, but to remember the one you carry inside. The inner temple, the living word, the fire that was never truly lost. The Apocrypha is no longer hidden, it's alive in you now. If these lost truths stirred something within you, don't let them fall silent again. Help us keep the flame alive. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. And drop a comment below. Which hidden book spoke to you the most? Your voice is part of the awakening.